They never see you until they need you. They never hear you until silence would cost them everything. This is a story about a woman who learned the price of invisibility, and the power of stepping out of it. Lucia Vega froze mid-polish as billionaire tech CEO Victor Reeves waved a thick document printed entirely in Mandarin before his executive team. The words burned in her throat, her secret fluency pressing against her ribs like a held breath. "Anyone who can translate this acquisition proposal gets my salary for a day," Reeves announced, his voice sharp with impatience. $27,400. He nudged Lucia's cleaning cart aside with the toe of his Italian leather shoe as if it were furniture. The conference room erupted in laughter. Executives exchanged smug glances, the kind shared by people certain the joke wasn't on them. Lucia kept her eyes lowered, focusing on the slow, circular motion of her cloth against the mahogany table, the smell of lemon polish grounding her. "Maybe we should just use Google Translate," Derek Willis, VP of Operations, joked, his Harvard ring clinking against his glass. "Probably more reliable than whatever discount service we'd get otherwise." More laughter, sharper now. Lucia's phone vibrated in her pocket. A reminder. 72 hours until the eviction hearing. 72 hours before a judge could sign away the roof over her mother's head. $27,000. The exact amount standing between dignity and disaster. Her fingers tightened around the jade translator's pen hidden in her pocket, cool and smooth, its carved characters worn by years of touch. Her father's final gift. A skill she had learned to bury. A heritage she had learned to hide. A chance dangling cruelly within reach. Would revealing her true self to people who looked through her bring salvation, or simply a new kind of humiliation? The question hovered in the air like a prophecy as she slipped quietly from the room, invisible once more. Lucia hadn't always been invisible. 15 years earlier, she had been a bright-eyed 8-year-old astonishing teachers by switching effortlessly between languages. Her Chinese mother, Min, had met her Dominican father, Rafael Vega, during an international student exchange in Boston. Their love had grown across cultures, stitched together by a shared devotion to words, to learning, to the belief that language could bridge any divide. Words build bridges between worlds, Raphael used to tell Lucia as he guided her small hand across the page, teaching her characters that danced like living things. By 10, Lucia translated effortlessly between her Chinese grandparents and Dominican relatives, her voice carrying meaning across generations, earning proud smiles on both sides of the family. The jade pen had been her 13th birthday gift, cool and heavy in her palm, its surface etched with characters meaning knowledge illuminates. When she held it close, she could almost smell the faint sandalwood of her father's study, where they spent countless evenings poring over texts in Mandarin, Spanish, and English. "This pen belonged to a great scholar," Raphael had said softly. "Now it belongs to another." 3 months later, Rafael Vega was laid off from Reeves Enterprises during what the company called a strategic restructuring. After 15 years building their Asian market partnerships, he was dismissed with a severance that barely covered 2 months of rent. The health insurance vanished overnight. When his persistent cough became a diagnosis, stage 4 lung cancer, the bills arrived faster than the rejection emails. Lucia remembered the night her father came home from an interview, his face gray. "They can't hire me," he whispered to Minimum. "Reeves blackballed me, claims I know too much." 6 months later, Raphael was gone, leaving behind $43,000 in medical debt, a devastated family, and a jade pen Lucia carried everywhere like both shield and wound. Min took on 3 housekeeping jobs. Her engineering degree from Beijing University meant nothing without American credentials. Lucia's dreams of a linguistic scholarship dissolved when her mother's first stroke hit, forcing Lucia to abandon her senior year at 17 to work full-time. Now, at 23, her life ran on exhaustion. Cleaning offices at Reeves Enterprises from 4 in the afternoon until midnight. Caring for her partially paralyzed mother until dawn. 3 hours of sleep. Translating academic papers online from 8 to 2 under the pseudonym Linguistic Bridge. $22 an hour when work came, far better than cleaning, but inconsistent. 60 hours a week. Every dollar accounted for. Rent, medication, debt, groceries, utilities. Survival left no margin. For 5 years, Lucia moved through Reeves Enterprises like a ghost, emptying trash while executives discussed billion-dollar deals. Her fluency turned their chatter into clarity, acquisitions, expansions, betrayals. She knew Victor Reeves had cut retirement contributions while buying a $14 million Aspen home. She knew Derek Willis took credit for strategies he hadn't written. She knew diversity statements masked brutal wage gaps. Knowledge without power. Intelligence without access. And now the clock was ticking. The document arrived Friday morning, stamped Shanghai, bearing the logo of HangTech Innovations. Lucia noticed Reeves's face flicker, panic, quickly buried. By noon, chaos rippled through the executive floor. Translation teams were unreachable. Deadlines loomed. Reeves stormed into the conference room, slamming the document down. Huang is offering exclusive manufacturing rights, he snapped. This could double our Asian market share, if we can read it. They couldn't. And the offer came with a 72-hour ultimatum. Lucia lingered, wiping already clean surfaces, her heart racing as she recognized technical characters her father had once explained. Reeves's impatience turned theatrical. Translated accurately in 48 hours and my daily salary is yours, he announced, eyes flicking to Lucia. Though I doubt they teach Mandarin in housekeeping school. Laughter followed. Lucia swallowed the heat rising in her chest. As executives scattered with poorly translated pages, Lucia saw their mistakes immediately. They misunderstood the title alone. The deadline matched her eviction. That night, Lucia decided she wouldn't reveal herself, not yet. She returned after hours, her uniform granting her invisibility. On the whiteboard, executives' translations were a disaster. Using her jade pen, Lucia corrected 3 critical sections. Precise. Undeniable. She signed it Night Owl. By morning, the office buzzed. Who the hell is Night Owl? Reeves demanded. Derek Willis erased her signature and claimed credit. Reeves praised him. Lucia felt the victory rot in her stomach. That night, she discovered the contract's hidden cost, 300 layoffs. Families like hers. The choice cut deep. Help them profit or speak and risk everything. Then came the cameras, the interviews, the locker search, the theft of her jade pen. Willis cornered her, threat dripping from every word. Immigration, silence, obedience. Lucia had 30 hours until eviction. 24 until the deadline. The board meeting arrived like a firing squad. Willis presented lies. Lucia corrected him, softly at first, then with certainty. Mandarin flowed free. Her father's name landed like thunder. Proof followed. Ratings. Memory. The room shifted. Reeves smelled. Opportunity. The offer returned, this time bound by contract. Lucia demanded protection. Her pen. Her dignity. And Reeves agreed. As the jade pen returned to her palm, the weight felt different. Lucia worked through the night in the small glass-walled conference room Reeves had assigned her, the city humming faintly beyond the windows like a restless witness. The jade pen lay between her fingers as she typed, its familiar weight anchoring her when fatigue threatened to pull her under. Vending machine coffee burned her throat. Technical diagrams blurred, then sharpened again as she forced herself to refocus. Mandarin characters flowed across the screen, not as symbols but as meaning, layers of intention, caution, and cultural subtext her father had drilled into her since childhood. By 3 in the morning, her shoulders ached and her eyes stung, but she was nearly 85% done. This wasn't just translation, it was interpretation. She flagged ambiguities, cultural hedges, deliberate phrasing meant to test integrity rather than comprehension. The contract was not purely predatory, but it wasn't benevolent either. HangTech was probing Reeves Enterprises, seeing how they would handle power, labor, and trust. Her phone buzzed. A text from her neighbor at the hospital. Doctors want to keep her another day. Need a $2,200 deposit. Lucia closed her eyes, breathing through the panic. 30 hours until eviction. 6 hours until deadline. She rested her forehead on her crossed arms for what she told herself would be 1 minute. The crash of liquid snapped her awake. Coffee spread across her notes, soaking through paper, seeping into her laptop keyboard. The screen flickered, then went dark. "Oh, clumsy me," Derek Willis said mildly, standing over her with an empty cup. "You looked exhausted. Thought you could use a refill." Lucia leapt up, blotting frantically, heart pounding. "My translation," she whispered. "Don't worry," Willis replied, smiling thinly. "I moved your files to my secure drive. For safety." She stared at him. "Give them back." He shrugged. "Looks like corruption. Technical glitch." As he walked away, he added softly, "Reeves expects perfection. One mistranslated clause could cost millions. He'll understand if you withdraw." Her landlord's name flashed on her phone seconds later. Eviction accelerated. Locks changed tomorrow morning. Lucia stood alone in the quiet room, staring at the ruined pages, the dead laptop, the clock bleeding away her options. For a moment, despair nearly won. Then her phone rang again. The hospital. Her mother's condition had worsened. They needed authorization now. Lucia sat back down, gripping the jade pen until her knuckles ached. She rebuilt the translation from memory, line by line, her father's lessons guiding her hand. Dawn crept in pale and unforgiving. When she finally looked up, Reeves stood in the doorway, Willis just behind him, satisfaction written plainly across his face. The clock read 8:47 a.m. 13 minutes. "I expected this," Reeves said coolly. "People should stay in their lanes. Housekeepers clean. Executives execute." He turned away. "Draft the termination notice." Lucia's chest tightened. Then her eyes caught the edge of a worn notebook peeking from her bag. Her father's research journal. "Wait," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Reeves paused. "My father worked on this technology," Lucia said, opening the journal. GX500 series. "He helped design the thermal modeling system." Hang references but doesn't explain. She flipped to diagrams, notes written in her father's careful hand. "This fills the gaps no translation agency could." Reeves studied the pages, calculation flickering. 10 minutes, he said. Lucia worked with a clarity that felt almost calm, the jade pen gliding as if guided by memory itself. At 8:58, she placed the completed translation on the table as the hang-tech video conference connected. Reeves scanned it, skepticism giving way to focus. "Perhaps you should wait outside," Lucia said. "No," a voice said from the screen. "We prefer Ms. Vega stays." Lin Hang appeared, flanked by executives, and beside him, Mr. Zhang, her father's former colleague. "It is an honor to meet Raphael's daughter," Zhang said in Mandarin. Lucia answered without hesitation, surprise blooming into understanding. Hang explained they had embedded complexity intentionally, testing whether Reeves Enterprises still possessed the expertise Raphael once represented. Lucia translated calmly, accurately, watching Reeves realize the ground had shifted. When she addressed the workforce ambiguity, Hang smiled. "It was a character test," he admitted. Willis interrupted, blustering, but Lucia cut him off, pulling up recovered security footage of his sabotage. Silence followed. Reeves watched, jaw tightening. "Mr. Willis," he said quietly. "You're fired." As security escorted Willis out, Hang added one final condition in Mandarin. Lucia translated. Hang Tech would proceed only if Lucia oversaw implementation as cultural liaison. Reeves hesitated, then nodded. The deadline passed with the contract signed. Reeves wrote the check, $27,400. Then came Hang's follow-up email. A $50,000 signing bonus, designated for Lucia's consultancy. With $77,400, Lucia paid the hospital, halted the eviction, and breathed freely for the first time in years. 6 months later, Lucia sat in her own office, sunlight spilling across polished walnut. Director of International Relations. Her mother's health had stabilized. The jade pen rested in a crystal stand. Lucia used it openly now. Her first initiatives reshaped hiring, promotions, training. Hidden talent surfaced everywhere once someone bothered to look. Reeves never apologized, but profit spoke louder than contrition. And Lucia no longer needed permission to exist fully. As she walked into the boardroom for her monthly presentation, executives rose. She smiled, thinking of her father. Words build bridges between worlds. And today, she was building highways. Ruth never told herself she was letting them stay. She told herself she was fixing a problem that would turn into something worse by morning if she didn't. The babies lay near the stove, wrapped tight, their cries fading into tired whimpers that rose and fell like uneven breaths after a long run. The man stood just inside the doorway, hat twisting in his hands, shoulders drawn inward like the warmth itself might accuse him of taking too much. Ruth kept her back to him, moving briskly between kettle and cupboard, each step clipped and deliberate, as if speed alone could keep her from thinking. "You can sit," she said without turning. "Or don't. Either way, don't hover." "Yes, ma'am, thank you," he corrected himself quickly. She set the kettle on the stove and listened again, head tilted just slightly. One baby coughed, dry and shallow. Ruth crossed the room before she meant to, crouching low beside the blankets, pressing two fingers gently to the baby's ribs, counting the rise and fall without moving her lips. Her hands were steady, they always were when something mattered. "Fever's mild," she said. "Not dangerous yet." The man exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. "I didn't know what to do," he admitted quietly. "I tried everything. I can see that," Ruth said sharper than she meant, then softened a fraction. "You can't rock a fever out of a body." She moved with quick efficiency, damp cloth, careful touch, small adjustments that eased the breathing just enough to notice. The crying slowed, not gone, but manageable. The man watched her like he was afraid to blink. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question. Ruth stiffened. "A long time ago," she replied. "Doesn't matter now." The other baby fussed louder, offended by the attention being uneven. Ruth glanced over and sighed through her nose. "You hear that?" she muttered. "They always know." She lifted the second baby with a confidence that surprised even her, settling the small weight against her shoulder. The baby cried harder for a moment, then hitched, confused by the steady rhythm of Ruth's breathing. She rocked once without thinking, then twice. She caught herself and stopped, jaw tightening. "Here," she said briskly, handing the baby back once the breathing shifted. "They'll sleep some now, not all night." The man nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you." Ruth turned away, scrubbing her hands at the sink longer than necessary. "You're not staying long," she said. "Soon as the sun's up, you move on." "I will," he said quickly. "I don't want trouble." "You already are," she muttered, the words heavier than she meant. Silence settled, broken only by the crackle of the stove and the uneven breaths of the babies. She poured hot water into a tin cup and set it near the blankets. "If they wake coughing again, warm cloth. Small feeds. Slow." "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated. "My name's Daniel." Names had weight. Ruth dried her hands and nodded once. Ruth. The night broke into pieces. Short stretches of sleep, crying, coughing, instructions murmured in the dark. Daniel followed carefully, clumsy but earnest. Each time he looked to her for reassurance, she pretended not to notice. She sat at the table, arms crossed, listening with half an ear, her body refusing rest even when the house stilled. Once, when a cry rose sharp and wrong, Ruth was on her feet before Daniel could stand, adjusting the baby's position, murmuring something low and soothing she hadn't planned to say. The crying eased. Ruth froze, realizing what she'd done, then straightened abruptly. "Don't let him get like that," she said, harsher now. "I won't," Daniel said. "I swear." Toward morning, when the wind finally died, the babies slipped into deeper sleep. Daniel sagged into a chair, exhaustion pulling him down. Ruth studied him from across the room, noting the way his shoulders curved inward, the careful distance he kept from everything that wasn't his. "You hungry?" she asked abruptly. He blinked, surprised. "I mean, yes, but it's fine." She huffed. "Sit still." She ladled out thin soup and set it in front of him. He ate like a man who hadn't expected kindness to last, slow at first, then with quiet urgency. "They don't have names?" Ruth asked, nodding toward the babies. Daniel hesitated. "Not yet. I didn't think it mattered if we kept moving." Ruth's chest tightened. "It matters," she said, then added, quieter, "eventually." Dawn crept in pale and unsure. Daniel woke with a start, apologizing for falling asleep. You meant to, Ruth said. Your body just didn't wait for permission. Breakfast came together without discussion. By mid-morning it was clear the babies weren't ready to move. One ran warm again, fussing no matter how careful Daniel was. They're staying another night, Ruth said, not looking at him. Maybe two. Relief flickered across his face. I'll work, he said immediately. Fix fences, chop wood, you don't work to earn mercy, Ruth cut in. You work because there's work to be done. He nodded. Days fell into a strange, familiar rhythm. Daniel worked sunup to sundown, hauling wood, patching boards, repairing a fence Ruth had meant to fix for years. He did it without complaint. Ruth watched from the porch, correcting him when he was wrong, pretending not to notice when he did it right the first time. Inside, the babies ruled the hours. They slept in short stretches, woke hungry, fussed endlessly, coughed just enough to keep Ruth alert. There were moments when the noise scraped at her nerves until her head throbbed. Once she snapped, sharp enough to startle the baby into silence. Ruth turned away quickly, jaw clenched. A minute later she knelt, smoothed a hand over the baby's head, voice low and steady. I'm sorry, she whispered. Daniel watched, awe and fear mingling. By the third day Ruth caught herself calling Daniel, the boy, under her breath. By the fifth it slipped out clearer, scolding him in a language he didn't understand but felt anyway. The babies grew stronger in stubborn increments. The coughing eased. The panic left their cries. Daniel learned the difference between hunger and discomfort, between fear and exhaustion. Ruth corrected him when he was wrong and said nothing when he was right. Exhaustion bound them tighter than affection ever could. Town noticed. A neighbor drove by slower. Someone left apples at the fence without knocking. Ruth pretended not to see until evening. Pressure followed. Polite questions. A councilman with clean boots and soft concern. We've had some questions, he said, glancing past Ruth toward the house. Children on the property. Everything here is my responsibility, Ruth replied. After he left, she stood on the porch long after his truck disappeared. I can go, Daniel said quietly. No, Ruth snapped, then steadied herself. They don't get to decide who belongs. The pressure didn't stop. Noise complaints, hinted visits, a letter requesting records. Ruth read it once, folded it neatly, set it aside. They think I'll get tired, she said. I won't. Daniel grew quieter, jumpier at passing cars. Ruth locked doors tighter, kept the shotgun close, not as a threat but a reminder. One night Daniel told her the truth. About the baby's mother. About the man who followed. About the fight that ended wrong. About running because money and influence chased him faster than grief could catch up. Ruth listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said quietly, I buried my son once. Loss doesn't ask permission. He admitted he'd planned to leave to protect her. I lost a child, Ruth said, each word deliberate. I don't lose another. The fear changed shape after that. It stopped asking him to run. It asked him to stand. The night the shed burned, the change proved itself. Smoke cut the air sharp. Flames climbed hungry. Rocks shattered glass. Voices murmured outside like distance made them safe. Ruth fired once into the air and the night split open. Silence followed. They fled. The shed collapsed into embers. Ruth didn't shake until after. She loaded the rifle, handed Daniel a flashlight. You take first watch, she said. I'll take second. Dawn came over blackened ground and standing walls. They wanted me quiet, Ruth said. They don't get to decide what survives here. The next day Daniel lifted a baby and a thin silver pendant slipped free. Ruth saw it and the world tilted. The chip along the edge. The memory of a chain slipping loose years ago. She said she'd lost a child. Then corrected herself. Not to the ground. To people who decided I didn't get to keep him. She didn't explain more. She didn't have to. I know what it feels like to lose a child, she said. And I know what it feels like to find one. The truth sat with them, heavy and warm. When men came again, slow and confident, Ruth stood on the porch with the rifle low and ready. Neighbors appeared. Sirens followed. The men retreated. Inside, the babies cried and settled again. That's not how family works, Ruth told Daniel when he offered himself to buy quiet. "You stand." Afterward, neighbors brought supplies and stood watch without being asked. The house didn't sleep. In the days that followed, the watching eased. Cars stopped lingering. Kindness returned quietly. Ruth came home with papers. "It's done," she said. "Land's not challenged. The boys are registered. Names and all." The house exhaled. One evening, Ruth murmured, "Grandma's here," without thinking. She didn't take it back. Years passed. The house breathed. The boys grew loud with safety. Daniel learned when to step forward and when to hold steady. One night Ruth opened the wooden box and handed him the worn chain. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I am." On the porch under endless stars, he asked if she ever regretted it. "No," she said. "I regret what I was told to accept." When one boy asked why they didn't live somewhere else, Ruth smiled. "Because this is where someone stayed." Daniel lingered at the doorway out of old habit. "I just like knowing I'm here," he said. "So do I," Ruth replied. Cedar Hollow never asked for attention. It held a quieter truth. Family was the place someone looked at you when it mattered and decided you weren't going anywhere. The days after the confrontation didn't rush. They settled, heavy and deliberate, like the land itself was testing whether it could trust what had survived. Cedar Hollow learned a new rhythm shaped by what had almost been taken. Cars stopped lingering at the road. Questions stopped being asked out loud. Word traveled quietly but firmly that the ranch wasn't unguarded anymore. Ruth noticed it in small ways. The way neighbors waved again without stopping. The way a box of diapers appeared on the porch one afternoon with no note and no one waiting to be thanked. Daniel moved through the house like someone relearning how to breathe. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened enough for him to sleep longer than an hour at a time. He fixed what had been broken, rebuilt what had burned, and learned where Ruth kept things without asking. The babies grew calmer. Their cries shortened. Their laughter came easier, filling rooms that had held silence for decades without overwhelming them, as if they sensed this place was safe enough to trust. One morning Ruth came back from town with papers folded neatly in her coat pocket. She didn't announce it. She never did. She set them on the table while Daniel warmed bottles, her movements steady. "It's done," she said simply. "No one's challenging the land. Not now." Daniel looked up slowly. "And the boys?" "Registered," Ruth replied. "Names and all." Emotion caught him off guard. He swallowed hard. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said gently. "I chose to." Something in the house exhaled after that. Not loudly, just enough to be felt. Ruth found herself humming while she worked, low and absent-minded, the sound slipping out when she thought no one was listening. Daniel heard it anyway. He didn't comment. He just smiled and rocked one of the boys a little longer. One evening after supper, dishes stacked and the fire burning low, Ruth sat in her chair with one baby against her chest, the other asleep nearby. Daniel watched from the table, quiet and present. The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open, making a small questioning sound. Ruth smiled despite herself. "Easy," she murmured. "Grandma's here." The word hung there, gentle and surprising. Daniel froze. Ruth did too. She didn't correct it. She didn't apologize. The baby settled, satisfied. Daniel turned away, blinking hard. Later, as they locked up and the house grew still, he stopped in the doorway. "Ruth," he said, voice unsteady. She looked up. "Thank you for not letting me disappear." Ruth studied him a long moment. "You didn't disappear," she said. "You stayed." Time moved forward. Repairs finished. The land healed in small ways. Laughter returned to rooms that had only known quiet. Ruth grew tired earlier these days, her steps slower, but she was never alone. Daniel learned the quiet language of the place, how to listen before acting, how to stand without taking over. One afternoon, while the boys napped, Daniel sat beside Ruth on the porch. The hills stretched wide and calm, the kind of calm that came after choosing to fight and surviving it. "I don't know what to call you," he said finally. Ruth didn't look at him. "You'll know when you're ready." He nodded, swallowed, and said it anyway. "Mom." Ruth didn't answer right away. Her hand tightened on the armrest. Her breath hitched once, sharp and silent. Then she reached out and rested her hand on his forearm. "All right," she said quietly. Years passed at Cedar Hollow without making much noise about it. Seasons came and went the way they always had. Snow to mud, mud to green, green back to gold. The land healed slow and steady, fence by fence, board by board. What changed wasn't the hills or the sky. It was the house. It no longer held its breath. It breathed. Ruth Jackson moved slower now. Her hands still knew their work, but her knees complained more often, and she let them. Daniel noticed before she had to say anything. He took over heavier lifting without turning it into a performance, fixed what broke, and sat with her on the porch at dusk when the day had given all it was going to give. The boys grew fast, loud in the way children are loud when they feel safe, their laughter bouncing off walls that had waited decades to hear it. They called the ranch home without ever questioning the word. It was where scraped knees were cleaned at the sink, where nightmares ended with lights turned on and voices steady in the dark, where the past didn't disappear but stopped being in charge. Ruth watched them run the fence line one afternoon, dust flying, and felt the quiet certainty settle in her chest. This was what staying had made possible. Daniel became the backbone of the place without anyone naming it. Folks in town stopped calling him the man staying out there and started using his name. Not everyone warmed at the same speed, but enough did. Enough mattered. He stood his ground when it counted and stepped back when it didn't, learning that strength wasn't about taking space but holding it steady. One evening long after the boys had learned to sleep through the night, Ruth sat at the kitchen table sorting old papers. Daniel moved to help, then stopped when he saw the wooden box open in front of her, its contents laid out carefully. She didn't rush. She never did anymore. "You sure?" he asked softly. Ruth nodded. "I am." She handed him the worn chain she'd carried for most of her life without knowing why it refused to let go of her. Daniel took it carefully, understanding without explanation. Some things didn't need words once they'd found their place. Later, when the house was quiet and the boys slept tangled in blankets, Ruth stepped onto the porch alone. Stars burned sharp and endless above the hills. Daniel joined her without a word, standing close enough to be felt without crowding. For a long moment they just listened to the night settle. "You ever regret it?" he asked. Ruth shook her head once. "No," she said. "I regret what I was told to accept." The years left their marks gently. Ruth's hair went fully silver. Daniel's face lined at the edges. The boys grew into themselves, carrying pieces of both of them without knowing it. The steadiness, the stubbornness, the quiet way of choosing right over easy. One afternoon as the sun dipped low and the house filled with the sound of plates being set, one of the boys asked, "Grandma, why didn't we live somewhere else?" Ruth smiled, not at the question but at its simplicity. "Because this is where someone stayed," she said. That night, after the boys went to bed, Daniel lingered at the doorway like he still did sometimes, a habit from when he'd been afraid of being asked to leave. Ruth noticed and sighed softly. "You don't have to hover," she said. "I know," he replied. "I just like knowing I'm here." "So do I," she said. Cedar Hollow never became famous. No one wrote stories about it. It remained a place you could pass without noticing if you weren't looking for something real. But inside its walls lived a truth that didn't need witnesses. Family wasn't blood alone or paperwork or history written by someone else. Family was the place where someone looked at you when it mattered most and decided you weren't going anywhere. And at Cedar Hollow, long after the worst nights had passed, that choice held.